Genetics is the study of inheritance. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. One of these pairs controls sexual determination in humans, the X and Y chromosomes.
Individuals with two X chromosomes are female. Individuals with one X and one Y chromosome are male. These chromosomes also control the strongest genetically determined behavioral trait in humans, sexual preference.
In most cases, individuals with a Y chromosome, i.e. males, are attracted to females. Individuals with no Y chromosome, i.e. females, are attracted to males.
But there are exceptions to this rule.
But let us first discuss the difference between sexual orientation and sexual preference.
The difference between sexual preference and sexual orientation is that one of them, sexual preference, applies to everybody. It's just whether you're attracted to males or females. And sexual orientation is really two traits, actually. It's the combination of that. Are you attracted to male or female? And are you yourself male or female? So it's whether those two match with each other. People often think of heterosexuality as one thing, as a default state. And in fact, it's two separate things, which is really important because what that means is that those two states of being attracted to males or being attracted to females, both are very active states. They don't just happen. They have to be actively mediated somehow, biologically speaking. So, when you have a developing egg, it has to decide as it's going to develop as a male or a female, and part of that choice is it going to be attracted to males or females?
When we are looking at the genetics of sexual preference, it is important to consider the epigenetic landscape.
The epigenetic landscape is a metaphorical idea which outlines the different pathways in development a cell may take towards differentiation. One genotype doesn't necessarily lead to one phenotype.
The idea of an epigenetic landscape can be depicted by a slope with branching pathways. For example, if we put a ball at the top of the hill on the middle input, it will most likely end up in one of the outputs in the middle. But it is also possible that it will be swayed in another direction. The same happens with sexual preference. Just because someone has the genes that might indicate they should be attracted to men or women, it doesn't necessarily mean this is the trait that will be expressed. Sexual preference may be an epigenetic change in the genome caused by the environment in the womb.
Studies have shown that if a mother has carried sons before, the chance of the next son being gay increases by 33%. This is known as the fraternal birth order effect. Genetically identical twins may have the same DNA, but different genes are switched on, which explains why many identical twins differ in sexual preference.
For example, if you have a twin who is homosexual, then your chance of being homosexual is also higher, considerably higher. If it's a monozygotic twin, it's about 50%. If it's a dizygotic twin, where they're basically just like siblings that happen to have been born at the same time, then it's about 20% increased. So that difference really shows there's a genetic component to it. But the fact that it's only 50% in monozygotic twins suggests it's not completely genetic. And that raises the obvious question of what else is it?
The prenatal environment can influence sexual preference. Hormones have an important effect on human sexual orientation. They determine our sexuality while we are still developing in the womb, through exposure to sex steroids. For instance, an exposure to a lower concentration of testosterone would lead to a female typical orientation.
But we have to keep in mind that sexual preference is innate, and the idea that someone's childhood or cultural or social factors can determine their sexuality is untrue.
But why does homosexuality exist, since it lowers the fertility rate? It appears to be disadvantageous from an evolutionary point of view. But in 2004, Italian researchers carried out a study on relatives of both homosexual and heterosexual men.
Female relatives of the homosexual men were on average more fertile than those of the heterosexual men.
Sexual preference is an extremely ethically sensitive issue.
There is a danger that the identification of genes which determine sexuality will lead to homosexual preference being classed as a disorder rather than a condition.
This may cause individuals to seek genetic screening of embryos when using in vitro fertilization, and selecting against embryos with the gay gene.
However, a condition is labelled a disorder if it causes a person to suffer, which is clearly not the case here, outside of social stigma, which is now quite rare.
Are we sure that this research will not simply bring about more issues?
rather than just solving the questions we have now?